The story of Arthur and Clara. The small, chipped ceramic mug felt solid and familiar in Arthur's hands. A small comfort against the gnawing emptiness of his afternoons. He was a man defined by schedules and duties for 40 years, and now, in his retirement, he found himself a vessel with no cargo. His wife, Eleanor, had passed 5 years ago. Leaving behind a silence so profound, he'd learned to hear the individual ticks of the grandfather clock she'd loved. He sat at the same window table at the morning Brew café every day at 2:30. Not because the coffee was better, but because he knew it was when Clara arrived. Clara was 50, maybe 51, a lifetime away from him, in his estimation. She was the kind of woman who had a laugh that started low and rumbled up into the room, like a small, pleasant earthquake. She owned the vintage bookstore down the street, and today she was talking animatedly to the barista, her hands gesturing as she described a difficult customer. Her hair, the color of burnt sienna, was tied back loosely with a silk scarf, a few strands escaping the frame of face that seemed to have been sculpted by both joy and sorrow. Each line of story he longed to read. Arthur didn't delude himself. He knew what this was. This was not a romance waiting to happen. This was a quiet, private adoration. He was a piece of well-worn furniture in her world, a friendly, predictable fixture she might smile at and nod to as she passed. She saw him, but she didn't see him. Not in the way he saw her. He'd learned the difference in quiet years after Eleanor. Seeing someone was acknowledging their presence. Seeing them was something else entirely. It was a recognition of shared history that wasn't there, a flicker of a future that would never be. He took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, the bitterness a suitable echo of his feelings. He had tried to get to know her. He'd gone into her store, a cozy cavern filled with the scent of old paper and dust, and asked her opinion on a new history book. They had spoken for an easy 10 minutes about the decline of physical books and the unexpected joy of finding a first edition. He'd walked away from that conversation feeling 10 feet tall, a foolish, boyish grin on his face. The next day, when he saw her, she'd given him the same warm, impersonal smile she gave every customer. The difference was, he had felt it in his bones. She'd forgotten the conversation entirely, or filed away as just another pleasantry. To her, it was a transaction. To him, it was a memory he replayed in the silence of his home. Today, she finished her conversation, a bright smile on her face. She walked past his table, and for a fleeting moment, her eyes met his. "Hello, Arthur," she said, her voice a melody to move out. Another book to save the world. He managed a small, genuine smile in return. Something like that. She nodded, took her drink, and headed to a small table in the corner, pulling out her laptop. The moment was over. He was Arthur, the kind man with the kind eyes who sat by the window. She was Clara, the woman he silently loved. The roles were set, and Arthur, the man who spent his life meticulously following the script, knew there would be no final act of the story. He would finish his coffee, pay his bill, and return to his quiet home, carrying the ache of a love that was his own. He stepped out of the cafe and into the late afternoon sun, the light a gentle balm on his skin. The walk home was a short one, past the butcher shop where he used by Sunday roast for Eleanor, to the park where he pushed his daughter Sarah on the swing so many decades ago. The memories were not painful anymore, just quiet echoes in the corridors of his mind. He missed the life he'd had, but he no longer grieved for it with the same raw intensity. The grief had settled, like dust on an antique, becoming a permanent, if invisible, layer of his existence. His house was immaculate. A man's orderliness born of necessity, not passion. The furniture was polished, the floors swept, the plants, a collection of Eleanor's ferns and spider plants that he tended with surprising diligence, were all water. He stood in the living room and listened to the silence. It was a different kind of quiet than the one he found in the cafe. There was a soft backdrop to the low hum of other people's lives. Here it was profound absence. He put on a kettle and stood at the kitchen counter, watching the water come to a boil. It was here, in this quiet, solitary space, that his thoughts about Clara were allowed to surface fully. They were foolish thoughts, he knew. He was 62 years old. What business did he have thinking about a woman, a decade his junior, a vibrant woman who was building a life? Not not simply maintaining one. He felt a flicker of the same boyish shame he'd felt when he'd first tried to talk to a girl in his youth. Yet, it wasn't the feeling of a young man desperate for first love. It was a quieter, more profound yearning for companionship that felt like it had been taken from him. Eleanor had been his rock, his confidant. Clara, with her laugh and her worn books, was a beautiful, unreachable island in the vast ocean of solitude. He knew he would never swim there. He was too old, too tired, too aware of the futility of it all. But he was grateful for the sight of it, for the warmth it cast across the water. It was enough, he told himself. It had to be. Just as the kettle began to whistle, his phone rang. It's harsh. The electronic chime a jarring note in the stillness. The caller ID read. He smiled faintly, picked it up. Dad? Everything all right? You sound a million miles away. Sarah's voice was warm and familiar, a little worn around the edges from raising two teenagers and a demanding career. I'm fine, my dear. Just making a cup of tea. It was a nice day. Did you go to the cafe? She asked, her tone shifting slightly, a careful, knowing note in her voice. I keep telling you, you should get a little social. It's not good for you to be alone all the time. Arthur felt a familiar pang of guilt, a defensiveness. I am social. I smile at people. I talk to Barista, and I see Clara. He said the last name softly, a quiet admission that hung in the air between them. Pause. Sarah was a good daughter. She knew when to push and when to listen. Clara from the bookstore? She asked gently. You talked about her. She's a lovely woman. Did you talk to her today? For a moment, she said hello. He felt foolish saying out loud, as if he were a teenager recounting a significant event. It was good. That's nice, Dad. You could ask her for a call. Or, ask her if you could help with her inventory. She's a single mom. I bet she could use the help. Arthur sighed, a sound that held all the weary reluctance of his 62 years. Sarah, you know how these things are. She's busy. She has a life. I'm not in that stage anymore. You're not in what stage? The living stage? Dad, you deserve to have someone in your life. Mom would have wanted that for you, she said, her voice a little firmer now. A daughter's worried plea. The conversation with Sarah had a different weight than his own thoughts. His self-pity, when expressed aloud, sounded almost ungrateful. He looked out the kitchen window at the neatly trimmed lawn he spent hours tending. I'm fine, Sarah. Really. I have a garden. The house. I'm a man with a schedule again, just a different kind. He knew it was a lie. He was a man with a schedule, but it was a schedule of avoidance, a way to fill the hours. So he didn't have to confront the profound silence in his heart. But hearing Sarah's genuine concern, a quiet hope in her voice, planted a new seed of thought in his mind. What if he was wrong? What if the book wasn't closed? What if he was just too afraid to turn the page? Across the cafe, Clara sat with her laptop open, the glow of the screen illuminating the focused look on her face. But her mind was not on the spreadsheet of inventory she was trying to wrangle. It was on the kind-eyed man by the window, Arthur. She'd seen him coming every day for months. A fixture at the cafe just as predictable as a grandfather clock who must have a home. He had a quiet dignity about him that she found both comforting and intriguing. He didn't demand attention. He simply existed, a gentle presence in the corner of her vision. She'd been a little startled when he'd come into a bookstore a few weeks ago. He'd been so earnest, asking her opinion on a book. She found herself talking to him with an ease she rarely felt. She remembered thinking what a lovely, thoughtful man he was. Then her phone had rung, a call from her son's school about a forgotten gym uniform, and the moment had vanished. The small, pleasant conversation was a bright spot in her day, but just a small spot. Her days were a frantic juggling act, chasing down invoices from the store, a constant stream of texts from her kids, an endless mental list of chores and appointments. She had to remind herself to eat lunch sometimes. Her life, for better or worse, was full. There was no space for a new complication. However pleasant the thought of it might be, she gave him a genuine, warm smile when she left. hoping it conveyed her appreciation for his quiet kindness. "Hello, Arthur," she'd said. The words had come to her lips without thinking. A small acknowledgement of the man she'd come to recognize. She glanced over at his empty table. A faint trace of steam rising from discarded mug. He had a good soul. She could feel it. A quiet man who had probably loved his wife deeply and was now learning to live again, just as she was. She was a single mother, the keeper of a small business, and a life in a perpetual state of flux. He was a widower, living a life of stillness. Their paths intersected briefly in the soft light of the café, a momentary parallel. But she was convinced they were headed in two very different directions. He had finished his tea, a conversation with Sarah replaying in his mind, when the sky outside darkened with sudden, impossible fury. A fierce gust of wind rattled the kitchen window, and then the rain came, a sheet of it, so heavy it seemed to obliterate the outside world. He stood there for a moment, surprised by the speed of it, and then he heard a loud, splintering crack from the direction of the street. He quickly put on his coat and stepped outside, a heavy umbrella in his hand. The wind snatched at it, threatening to turn inside out. He had to see what had happened. He followed the sound, his old legs moving with a renewed purpose. When he turned the corner, he saw it. A massive branch in the old oak tree in front of Clara's bookstore had snapped under the force of the wind, crashing down against a large front window. The glass was spiderwebbed with cracks, a jagged shard hanging dangerously loose, and a torrent of rain was pouring into the shop, soaking the precious books inside. Clara was standing in the doorway, soaked to the bone, a look of shocked despair on her face. She was holding a stack of dripping books, her laptop abandoned on a nearby dry table. Her usually vibrant spirit seemed to have been extinguished by the sudden disaster. He didn't hesitate. "Clara!" He shouted over the word again. She looked up, her eyes wide with recognition. "Get inside. You'll catch your death." He ran to her, his umbrella now a useless shield against the onslaught. "Where's your phone? We need to call someone. Let's get these books out of the water first." She just nodded, still in a daze, and pointed a trembling hand toward the back of the store. He saw a pile of clean towels and began grabbing them, working quickly, barking instructions over the sound of the storm. He wasn't the kind man from the cafe anymore. He was a man of action, a man with purpose. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't just a fixture in the corner of a room. He was a presence. And in the chaos and storm, Clara finally saw him. Hours later, the storm had moved on, leaving behind a sky of bruised purple and a silence that felt different from Arthur's usual quiet. The front window was makeshift patchwork of plywood and tarp, and the floor was an organized chaos of drying towels and damp books. Clara had managed to call her son, Leon, who had helped with the heavy lifting before heading back to his evening class. Now it was just the two of them. They sat on a low, dusty couch in back of the store, a mug of steaming chamomile tea in each of their hands. Clara had a blanket draped over her shoulders, and her hair was a damp, unruly mess. She looked exhausted but grateful. "I can't thank you enough, Arthur," she said, her voice as soft as acid. "I don't know what I would have done. I was just standing there, frozen." He waved a hand dismissively, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "Nonsense. Anyone would have done the same. I'm just glad I was nearby." He was lying, of course. He hadn't felt this alive, this useful, in years. The physical work of helping her, the frantic energy of saving her books, it chased away the quiet ghostly solitude, at least for a while. "No, not everyone," she insisted, turning to look at him. "You were so calm. You knew exactly what to do." Her gaze was different now, more direct, filled with an honest curiosity he hadn't seen before. "You said you were retired. What did you do before?" "I was a civil engineer," he said, the words feeling foreign this time. "Planned a lot of things that never got built. Built a few things that weren't planned very well." He chuckled softly, a sound she found unexpectedly warm. It was mostly about finding the most efficient way to solve a problem. A broken window was a pretty simple one. Clara smiled, a tired but heartfelt gesture. "I guess I was just too close to see a problem." She gestured around the cluttered room. "My life is usually a mess of things. Arthur, books, kids, leaky roof. There's always something." She She looked down into her mug. Sometimes it feels like I'm running just to stand still. He understood that feeling, though his version was the opposite. He was standing still, and the world was running on without him. Running in place is better than not running at all, he said, the word surprising even himself. He was no longer a man who only observed. He was a man who was now, at this moment, an active participant in another person's chaos. He felt a quiet joy in it, a purpose he thought was gone forever. The next morning, Arthur arrived at the bookstore well before the official opening time, a thermos of fresh coffee in his hand. Clara was already there, pulling a heavy, wet blanket from the shelf. She looked up, startled, then offered a small, grateful smile. "Arthur, you didn't have to," she began, but he just shook his head and set the thermos on the dry desk. "I know," he said simply. They fell into an easy rhythm. The day was spent in a series of small, quiet tasks. He moved damaged books from the floor, meticulously stacking them on a dry counter, and she ran a dehumidifier, its soft and filling the space. The usual chaos of her shop was replaced by a kind of organized stillness, and he felt a peaceful satisfaction in the order he was helping to create. They spoke very little. A shared nod was enough when he needed her to move. A shared glance when she found a book that was beyond saving. The silence wasn't the empty, hollow silence of his heart. This was a shared quiet, a purposeful silence punctuated by the soft shuffle of his feet and the rustle of Clara's hands as she wiped down a bookshelf. It was a silence of two people working in unison, not out of duty, but out of a shared concern. He noticed things he hadn't before. The way she would gently brush a bit of dust from the spine of the book, her reverence for the objects in her care, the small, focused line that appeared between her brows when she was concentrating. He felt a quiet warmth in his chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with the coffee in the thermos. This was a different kind of love, a less frantic, more gentle emotion. It was not a grand, dramatic passion, but the quiet, steady hum of two lives finally beginning to resonate with each other. For the first time, Arthur allowed himself to hope that their quiet moments might last a little longer than just an afternoon. Sarah hung up the phone, a broad smile spreading across her face. She was sitting in her small, chaotic office, a mountain of paperwork on her desk, but all she could focus on was her father's voice. He hadn't called to complain or to report on the weather. He had called to tell her, quite simply, that he was at Clara's bookstore, helping her clean up after the storm. "He's helping Clara," she whispered to herself, as if the words themselves were a magic incantation. She'd been worried about him since her mother passed, a constant, low-level anxiety that was fading away into the neat, organized silence of his home. He was a man who was defined by purpose, a provider, a husband, a father, and in retirement, without Eleanor, his purpose had seemed to vanish. He'd become a kind of ghost in his own life, moving through the motions without the spark she remembered. The storm had been a terrible thing for town, but for her father, it felt like a miracle. The disruption was careful, self-imposed isolation, a chance to be needed, to be seen not as a quiet widow, but as a capable, helpful man. She pictured him there, in Clara's cozy shop, no doubt meticulously organizing books and giving sensible advice, his civil engineer mind finding order in chaos. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, a mixture of relief and a quiet, profound happiness. Her father deserved to be happy. He deserved to find a new kind of purpose, and perhaps a new kind of love. The unrequited adoration he confessed her on the phone now felt different. Not like a source of passive longing, but like a seed that had finally found fertile ground. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of his new story. By the late afternoon, the initial panic and hard labor had given way to a quieter, more reflective atmosphere. The worst of the damage was contained, and the shop was starting to feel like a bookstore again, even with a plywood window. Arthur and Clara sat on a low wooden bench, a small island of calm and organized wreckage. The only sounds were the soft hum of the dehumidifier and the gentle click of Clara's pen as she made a list of damaged books. "You know," Clara said, her voice soft, "my son asked me how I knew you. I told him you were the kind man who sits in the cafe. And that was all I knew." She looked up, a small, self-deprecating smile on her lips. "He asked if you had a name. I didn't even know your last name." "It's Peterson." Arthur replied, feeling a familiar shyness. Arthur Peterson. He found it strange to say the name out loud, as if he were reintroducing himself to a world he'd been absent from for a long time. Arthur Peterson, she repeated, a thoughtful cadence of words. And I'm Clara Jensen. It's funny how two people can see each other every day and not really know a thing about each other. She put her pen down. My husband, Liam's father, passed away a few years ago. He was a musician, the opposite of organized. I'm always cleaning up messes, one way or another. She laughed, a short, wistful sound. Arthur felt a pang of profound understanding. My wife, Eleanor, she loved schedules. Her calendar was a work of art. After she passed, I just kept the schedule. It was a way to fill the hours, I suppose. It felt like if I stopped, the whole thing might fall apart. He looked around the shop, at the carefully stacked books, and tidy piles of towels. This feels a bit like that, finding a new way to keep things from falling apart. Clara watched him, her gaze gentle and knowing. She saw past his quiet politeness now, to the man beneath. She saw the lines of grief on his face, but she also saw the genuine warmth in his eyes, the subtle humor in his smile. We're all just trying to find a way to keep things from falling apart, I guess, she said. Some of us are good at building things, and some of us are good at keeping them. I'm glad you were around to help me with my demolition. He met her gaze, and for the first time he didn't look away. There was no unrequited longing in his eyes now, just a simple, hopeful presence. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of the unspoken recognition of two people who found a kindred spirit in the quiet chaos of their lives. A week later, the new window was installed, a clean, unblemished sheet of glass that let in a brilliant afternoon sun. To celebrate, Clara had insisted on making dinner. Arthur found himself standing in a brightly lit kitchen, a place of comforting, disorganized clutter. There were magnets on the fridge, a half-finished watercolor painting propped against a wall, and a low, pleasant hum of classical music playing from a small speaker on the counter. He watched her as she chopped vegetables, her movements quick and efficient. She had changed out her work clothes and was wearing a soft-looking sweater, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows. This is a new experience, he said, and she laughed, a sound that filled the room. Which part? The vegetables or the company? She asked playfully. Both, he admitted. My home is a bit more scheduled. Everything has its place. Clara stopped chopping and looked at him. Do you like it that way? I used to. It felt safe. Now it just feels empty. The words were out before he stopped them. A raw, honest admission that would have been unthinkable a week ago. She didn't flinch. She just nodded, understanding in her eyes. My husband was the opposite. He left notes and everything. Don't touch this. This is for the song I'm writing. Our son is just like you. They're a whirlwind. I used to be so annoyed by it, but now... She trailed off, a hint of sadness in her voice. Now I'd give anything for a messy morning. She looked at him, and for the first time since their first conversation, he saw a glimmer of her loneliness. It was a mirror of his own, but it was a loneliness that was born of a different kind of life. Chaotic, vibrant one that was now quiet. I have a schedule for Thursdays, Arthur said, the words feeling clumsy but necessary. I buy the groceries. I water the plants. I get my coffee. Fills the day. Well, Clara said, turning back to the cutting board, a new warmth in her voice. Maybe we should add dinner with Clara to your Thursday schedule. He felt a smile break across his face, a slow, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. I think that's a schedule I can get used to. And so, it became a part of their lives. A new, unspoken schedule. On Thursdays, Arthur would still get his coffee. But now he'd also bring a bag of groceries to Clara's. The coffee shop table became a memory, a symbol of a time when their worlds were parallel, but not connected. He spent his days in his quiet home, but his evenings were filled with the gentle chaos of her bookstore and the vibrant warmth of her kitchen. He listened to her talk about her son, her books, her worries, and she listened to him talk about Eleanor, his engineering projects, and the garden he tended. He no longer sat alone in the mornings with his coffee, replaying a single, fleeting conversation. He sat in his chair, looking out at his perfectly manicured lawn, and thought not of a love he couldn't have, but of friendship he was so grateful to have found. His grief for Eleanor had not disappeared, but it was no longer the all-consuming silence of his life. It was a part of him, like the lines on his face and the memories in his heart. Clara had seen him not as a lonely old man, but as a kind man who knew how to build things and keep them from falling apart. She had, in her own way, built a new foundation for him, and in doing so, she had helped him build one for himself. Their story was not a whirlwind romance or a grand, dramatic love affair. It was quieter, more gentle, like the late afternoon sun on a peaceful day. It was a story of two lives that found a new, quiet purpose, not in escaping the loneliness, but in sharing together. Epilogue. A year had passed, and the rhythms of their lives had settled into a new, comfortable cadence. The chipped ceramic mug was still a part of Arthur's day, but now it was often filled with the coffee Clara made for him at the start of their shared Thursdays. The bookstore, with its new window, was a place he now knew intimately, from the scent of old paper and dust to the quiet corner where Clara's son, Liam, sometimes sat to do his homework. Arthur's home was still immaculate, but now it sometimes held the joyful clutter of Clara's grandchildren, who were delighted by the old man with the fascinating stories about bridges and buildings. Their love was a quiet thing, a feeling that had grown slowly and steadily, like the ferns Eleanor had left behind. It was not a consuming fire, but a steady, warm light that made the world a little less dark for them both. It was in a shared glance over a dinner table, in the easy way they could sit in comfortable silence, and in the quiet understanding of two people who had both known deep loss and had, against all odds, found a new reason to smile. They were not looking for a grand, dramatic final act. They were simply living day by day in a beautiful, peaceful space they had built for each other.